I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we're going to be talking about how do you know if you're a good writer. Now, I'm going to start by apologizing for being gone for a month. I admit it is hard to juggle being a freelance editor, also working as a content editor for my local city, and then also doing videos. And if you don't know, I'm also a foster parent, so I've got that kind of mixed in, so my life gets kind of hectic and crazy. So I do these videos when I can, try to get them out every Friday if I can, but yeah. I wanted to talk about whether you know you're a good writer because I see it so much on Reddit boards. I see it in writers boards and writers markets and things like that, where people just want to know, well, how do I even know if I'm a good writer, and why should I bother, and should I even try? I just don't know. I'm trying to write these stories and they just seem so terrible to me, or they've got an idea in their head, but they just don't know how to get it out on paper. They don't know where to start. They don't know where to begin. We kind of talked about some of this, about how to start a story. That was one of our very first videos, and also talked a little bit about what you can do as a writer to overcome writer's block and that kind of stuff. I want to talk a little bit about what goes into being a writer. First, I'm going to use the analogy of a violin. I play violin. I played from the time I was 8. And I still play, although I don't play in an orchestra anymore. Would you expect to show up to your first lesson or your first day and be able to play Vivaldi? The answer is probably no. You might be able, if you have a really good ear, to eke out a little bit of hot cross buns, or maybe even some Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars. But you wouldn't expect to be able to play a really good song. And that would be completely unreasonable. Even if you were super talented and you started to pick up the violin really fast, no one would expect you to show up at a lesson and be able to just instantly be able to play Vivaldi. It seems like a lot of writers out there seem to think that, at least beginner writers, seem to think that that's what's going to happen. That they're going to sit down and they're going to write down their first story or book, and it's going to be wonderful, and they're going to read it and they'll be like, wow, I'm a genius. I'm so good at writing. I can't believe it. The truth is even if you're really talented or gifted as a writer, you're still going to have to work at it. You're going to have to work hard. And you're going to have to practice, and you're going to write things that aren't so good. And especially if you're writing a first draft, you shouldn't expect for it to be perfect. So one of the things that I did as a teenager is I loved to write. And so I wrote in journals. We are filming in my library, but I've kind of turned the camera around because I want the Christmas tree in the background. But to my right, I have a whole bunch of journals that I've kept since I was 11 years old. I loved writing in them. I wrote in them every single day up until I was 17, and then they got sporadic, and then I started to journal online. But this is an example of one of my journals. I also wrote super tiny. Luckily, I think I was about 16 by this point, but my writing started to get a little larger. This was a book that I decided I was going to write. I had written sporadically in my journals little stories and stuff, and I thought, I'm going to write my first book, and it's going to be awesome because I've got this great idea. It's not horrendous, but it's not good. I have a character that I thought I needed a backstory for, and so I literally wrote this character's entire backstory in here. It is not necessary. Now that I understand how to write and I understand a little bit more of the craft and how to build a character, I know that I don't actually need to have an entire backstory that spans, many years, and that wasn't necessary to the story. The story could have just started in present time, and we get a little bit of that backstory, but that actually would add to the mystery of the character. It's good for me, the author, to know the backstory of my character, but it wasn't necessary for the whole thing. When I got to grad school, I had actually typed this up at one point, and my professor said, well, what do you want to work on? My very first professor advisor was like, what's the first fictional piece that you want to work on? And I said, well, I've got 2 stories. One is a character in search of a plot. That was this one. Had lots of great character, but not much of a plot. And I have another one that's a plot in search of a character. And my advisor thought about it for a moment and said, I think we should work with the plot that's in search of a character. That's actually easier. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but I do now. When you have no plot, just a character, that character can kind of be inserted into a lot of different stories. When you have a plot and you just need to build some characters that work well within that world, that is a little easier. Not necessarily good though. Again, this wasn't great though. I was 16. I was still learning. I was writing. I was, discovering. I learned how to research. This book was very research heavy. So that was my introduction to going to a library and getting out all these books and having them sitting on the table and like learning about ancient civilizations, because that was something that I was really interested in, and that's where the story kind of takes place. Now, this character that I have, I think she's still fantastic, and maybe one day she'll make her way into a story that I have, but for now, she kind of lives on in this journal, and that's all that she is. Now, I wrote another book. This was actually a design thing that I had to do for one of my desktop publishing classes, where I had to design a book inside and out, so this is actually, you cannot tell, but this is actually taped together. I sat there cutting out this book and taping every single piece of paper together. So it's really an accordion without the cover. It like just kind of spans out. And I made the cover, and I was still learning how to do design, but I still think this is pretty good, honestly. I worked really hard on this. I read it a couple of years ago, or reread it, I guess, after I gone to grad school and after I learned about craft, and I was like, it's not a horrible story either. It's better than that one, the first one, but it's still not that great. And I wrote that when I was doing it in my undergrad. It's an okay story. It's better. It's got a great plot. It's got some good characters in it, but I was still struggling with craft, understanding things like writing short sentences makes the reader's eye move quicker across the page. So when you're writing action, you should do short sentences, because that makes it more clipped and quipped, or clipped and is there another word? Clipped, just clipped. That makes the action more clipped. And I didn't know that even was a thing. I didn't try. Another thing that I didn't know was that when you're writing, you should be careful about lots of adverbs. And I have a lot of adverbs in that thing. There are a lot of ly verbs throughout. Of course, my point is that you have to learn and grow and practice. If you want to be a great writer, it doesn't happen overnight. You aren't going to play Vivaldi instantly. Even famous writers, like I've talked about Charles Dickens, he had books that were flops. Books that people did not enjoy or didn't like, or only a small set of the audience liked them. You're going to have books that you are going to struggle with writing, and you're going to have books that are a character in search of a plot. And you're going to have books that are plots in search of a character. And you're going to write a story and start in the wrong place. As I talked about in that first video, you're going to have things that happen in your story, and you're going to read it again and go, just like I do with this one, and say, this is horrible. This is not good. I can do better than this. And then you'll learn, and you'll read books, and you'll read books about storytelling and craft, and you'll read about what you need to do. And then the next story will be better. You aren't going to play Vivaldi instantly, and that's okay, because this is a journey. I also want to point out that we don't all have to be super talented. That's okay. One of my favorite engineers, modern engineers, is a man called Dean Kamen. And Dean Kamen talks about how he is actually not super talented or gifted, which seems so crazy because this man has invented so many amazing things. Most of us know him for the Segway, but he's also invented a portable dialysis machine, a water filtration unit, and anytime you go to like Taco Bell and they have those Coca-Cola machines that you push a button and it gives you what you want and you can mix flavors and stuff, that was also him. He helped Coca-Cola do that in exchange for distributing his water filtration units to countries that needed them. Now, I think that this man comes across as a genius. He's amazing. He does FIRST programs and robotics, and he seems incredibly intelligent, but he'll tell you he's a slow reader and that he's not naturally gifted at this. And I think that's great, because what that shows me is that you don't have to be. You don't have to be a super talented whatever. If you study and you work hard, that's the important part of writing. Are you gifted at this? Maybe. And if you're not, that's okay too. I also want to talk about bad books, or books that maybe not everybody loves, or books that are not written that well. I can't believe I'm going to admit this. When I first read Harry Potter when it came out in 1998, I worked at a bookstore. And I worked at Borders. I was not impressed at all. I had read lots of children's books by that point. I was a voracious reader, so I read everything I could get my hands on. And I was like, another book about an academy, I'd rather read Tamora Pierce. And I just shrugged my shoulders and moved on. It kind of surprised me when it took off, because to me it was just another kid's book, and another fantasy kid's book that was with the school and stuff. I mean, Ursula Le Guin had already done something like it, so it didn't catch my interest in the way that it did other people. Now, obviously I wasn't a small child, but I've always liked kids books even as I've gotten older, so it just didn't capture my imagination. I didn't think it was that well written, and I didn't enjoy it. I've since read all the books. I understand their appeal, and I quite enjoyed them when I did read them. And I also listened to them as audiobooks, which was also a lot of fun, listening in the car as I go to work. But the point is that not everybody's going to love everything that you write anyways. So you can't use that as a gauge. You can't use what other people think about your writing as a gauge as to whether it's good or not. I know writers who read their Goodreads reviews and stuff like that, and I know some that don't. And they say they don't because they don't want to know. They don't want to know that you thought that the characterization was horrible, or that you didn't like how the plot moved, or you hated the ending. That's not important to them. They told their story. If you like it, fantastic. If you didn't, move on. There's like millions of other books that you can read. That's an important aspect when you are trying to gauge, especially if you're a young person and you're just getting started and you're trying to decide whether, it's even worth it to write. It is worth it to write. And this is where I'm going to move into where writing is an application for other things. We all have to write in our daily lives. Most of us. We write emails. You have to work on cover letters. You have to create things. You have to do presentations at work. I do all of that. A writing life and knowing how to write is important to other aspects of your life. So it is not a waste of time to be creative in that way. Also, as we move out of a more industrialized society and into things that are more automated, we talk about AI and things a lot, we are going to move into a realm where the work that needs to be done by human beings is creative work. And having your mind be creative is so important and integral, I think, to the future of our society. I think that teaching young people how to step outside of a box of filling in multiple choice questions is extremely important. So is it worth it for you to try to write? Yes. Write fan fiction. Write books that you think are interesting. Tell stories. Make them short, make them long, whatever. If you start a short story and it turns into a book, that's great. If you write a story and you thought it was going to be a book and it's only 20 pages long, then that's good too. I don't want you to put yourself into a box or to compare yourself to another writer. I am surrounded by wonderful books, and I only collect the books that I love. So I am surrounded by books that I absolutely adore, and I'm not going to compare myself to them. I love to write. I also like to edit. And so one of the things as an editor that I try not to do is to compare the books that I'm editing to other books I've read. That's not fair to the author at all. I wouldn't do that if I was editing your book. I would want your book and your voice to shine through, because you are not J.K. Rowling, and you are not Charles Dickens, and you are not Beth Revis, you are not Garth Nix. Naming some of these famous authors, I'm looking at my shelves and going, I am not Tony D. Terlizzi. I love his books, but I don't write like him, and I'm not going to tell a story like him. And it took practice to get to the point where I could write decent stories. What was my first story that I wrote? I think I wrote a book about a girl who was kidnapped and she becomes the leader of a children's smuggling ring. I think I was a little obsessed with Star Wars at the time, so I'm still obsessed with Star Wars, but I was really obsessed with it and the whole smuggler thing, and so I thought that would be a lot of fun to write about. It was the worst. Okay, I never finished it. It wasn't worth finishing, but it did teach me how to write, and it taught me some skills that I needed. And so as time has gone by, I've learned how to write characters, and I've learned how to write plot, and I understand pacing, and I've taken out some of the verbal tics that I include in my books. I use the words just and even a lot, and it turns out I don't need them at all. Every time I see them, I actually do a global search when I'm done with the book, and I remove all instances of just, even, or seems. That's my other one. These are things that I've learned over time. They've been pointed out to me by beta readers. They've been pointed out to me by, by other people who've read my books, like advisors and professors and, stuff. I have a master's degree in creative writing. So I've had my stuff pretty extensively gone over by people who wanted me to be better, but they were also very harsh in their criticism. And I appreciate it because I needed it. And I went into grad school thinking I was a okay writer. And I left grad school thinking I might be able to make a career out of this. I don't know. Now, I haven't made a career out of it. I've actually made a career out of being an editor. But it turns out that those skills that I learned in creative writing have served me very well in working in publishing and doing editing. So I am not sad about that decision. So what I want you to do, if you have the time today or sometime in the week that you've watched this, I want you to write a short story. Just something quick, a page or two, nothing long. It can be about anything, but I want you to write a story and not worry about whether it's good or not. Don't even think about it. I want you to just let that go and tell something that you think would be fun. Maybe tell a personal story about something you've done, at Christmas time. It can be happy, it could be sad. I know that this time of year is not always fun for everybody. And so I want you to really explore a little bit about writing and not worrying about whether you're good or not. And especially if you're the kind of person who's worried about it, let it go. Just let it go. For one story, don't worry about it. Just write. And then read it and say, what can I do better? That's how you get to the point where you can play Vivaldi. You don't do it. You don't go in expecting to do it. You've got to practice. And so I hope that as you work through, some of your self-confidence issues in writing, that you also go through it with the understanding that you're still taking lessons and you're still learning and you're still growing as a writer. And we're all still doing that. Even famous writers who have gotten really big and you go get your book signed by them, they're still learning too. And their books are getting better. I will say this about J.K. Rowling. Her books got better. Her writing got better. I can definitely see a difference in her writing between book 1 and book 7. They are very, very different. And I can see that she was learning the process of writing as she went. I think that you need to go into it with that thought and with the understanding that sometimes books get published and they're not the best, but people love them anyways, and it's okay. I do own some books that I probably are not the best written books, but they're books that I fell in love with. And they're books that made me keep wanting to read. And that's the important part. That's what you're doing. You're writing, hopefully, for other people. It's okay if nobody else has read it. Nobody else has seen this book. I think I might have read pieces to my mom, but my mom thinks everything I write is wonderful, so she's not a very good beta reader because she thinks everything I write is good. It's okay if some of the stuff that you write ends up in a drawer. Because you have to think of it as practice. Don't forget to press like and subscribe to my channel. We post new writing tips almost every Friday. I've been Venus with Galaxy Ink. I hope your writing is out of this world.